Welcome back. Iran, which the US accuses of fomenting tension in Iraq, has come up in the Istanbul conference with a plan it says will help resolve the Iraqi crisis. Iranian Foreign Minister Manouchehr Mottaki says the crisis has three aspects: security, political and economic. He's called for a timetable for withdrawal of foreign troops and empowering the Iraqi government. On the political front, Mottaki says collective help from regional states is needed. He's called on them to reopen their embassies as quickly as possible. He says to deal with the economic crisis in Iraq, the international community must help with reconstruction efforts and help Iraqi refugees to return home. And we're joined again by our guests in Washington, D.C., Ambassador David Mack, Vice President of the Middle East Institute, and in Ankara, Ibrahim Kalin, the Director of the SITA Foundation for Political, Economic and Social Research. Welcome back. And just a reminder that we did have Ali Ad-Dabbagh, Iraqi government spokesman, but he had to pull out of the show just beforehand because of a technical difficulty. Ambassador Mack, what do you make of Iran's plan? For example, the call for a timetable for troop withdrawal. Even US Congress wants that. Doesn't seem to be anything new, is it?
It really isn't. On the other hand, I think quite clearly the rather good state of relationships between Baghdad and Tehran has been helped a lot by the long-term, going back a decade or so, and rather good relations existing between Jalal Talabani and the Iranians. Talabani, now the president of Iraq, with a great deal of influence in the inner circle in Baghdad, but his militia, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, has over the years done a much better job of keeping Iranian Kurdish emigres who've taken refuge in Iraq under control. The big contrast between the way he's dealt with these Iranian Kurdish terrorists and the way that Masoud Barzani has dealt with the PKK. Jalal Talabani has understood that for Iraq, a good relationship with Iran is absolutely essential, and at the same time, he obviously, along with most other Iraqis, wants to do everything he can to assure that Iran will know there are certain red lines it can't cross that would bring it into interference with Iraqi essential issues.
Ibrahim Kalin, do you feel that in many ways Syria and Iran are somewhat off the radar at present with regards to being blamed for instability in Iraq because of the issue of Turkey and the PKK?
It could be related to that, but I think the American attempts to keep Syria and Iran out of the Iraqi issue has largely failed. Iran and Syria are seen, at least in the region, by Turkey, by many other countries also, as part of the solution. If there's going to be a kind of a long-term reconciliation and solution to the Iraqi crisis, these two countries will have to be in the game. But Iran is also shifting positions. I mean, their main concern is now to get some kind of a green light or legitimacy from the countries in the region about their nuclear program. Most of the countries, including Turkey, are not in favor of Iran having any advanced nuclear program. So Iran has not been able to convince even the countries in the region that it's after peaceful purposes, it's for peaceful purposes that they are going into the nuclear issue, etc. But what's happening is that again the positions are keep changing. Two nationalisms are pulling Iraq in opposite directions right now. The Kurdish nationalism, if it goes to its logical end, will definitely end up with an independent Kurdish state, which will mean the disintegration of Iraq. And then there is the Arab nationalism represented by Sadr, who is not that close to Iran, but they're arguing for territorial integrity of Iraq, but in the name of some kind of an Arab nationalism. So Iran is trying to, keep its kind of position within that structure to make sure that, they have a say, even though they have good relations with...
It's interesting, I'm sorry to interrupt you, interesting that you mentioned the word nationalism because an aggressive sort of nationalism comes to mind when many people think of the Turkish military. Are they not a part of the problem as well in terms of maintaining their relevance and necessity in the eyes of the Turkish public by continuing a conflict with the PKK?
Yeah, that argument has been made before, and the public consensus is that, you know, whatever it takes to confront PKK terrorism and end it at some point, it has to be done at this point. Therefore, of course, they look at the military, they look at the Erdogan government, they look at other security elites and political establishment in Turkey, and basically tell them that, you know, find a way to agree on the most important issue here, which is to end terrorism. And I think the military has been, even though a lot of kind of hawkish rhetoric has been put forward in the name of the military, but official statements, I think, have more or less been very reasonable, trying to contain the public opinion. For example, Chief of Staff Yaşar Büyükan had said a couple of days ago that they will wait until the Prime Minister meets with President Bush, and we will see what comes out of that meeting. And remember, Erdogan is taking a high officer from the army with him to that meeting. So they are part of the process. So I think it will be too simplistic to say that the army wants to continue this conflict.
All right, Ambassador Mack, Ambassador Mack, I want to go to Ambassador Mack, talking about the political issues. On the issue of addressing pressing political issues, former Prime Minister Iyad Allawi said recently in the New York Times, unfortunately, neither Washington nor the government of Prime Minister Maliki seems to understand that reconciliation between Iraq's ethnic and religious groups will begin only when we change the flawed electoral system that was created after the fall of Saddam Hussein, or else Iraq is headed to disintegration. Your thoughts on that? Elections are coming up only in 2009.
Well, I certainly agree that the elections that took place in January of 2005 were very poorly designed. It was based upon recommendations from the United Nations, interestingly enough, but it turned out to be basically a sectarian census, and rather than an election among various candidates that were known to the public, it was much more a how do you identify in terms of your sectarian identity, and therefore vote for this list for the whole country without there being any really serious campaigning. So it was a very, very poorly designed election.
All right, Ambassador Mack, I'm going to have to interrupt you. I'm sorry you're not going to have the opportunity to completely explain that, because we have run out of time on the program. Ambassador David Mack in Washington and Ibrahim Kalin in Ankara, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us, and thank you so much for joining us here on Inside Story.